Donald Trump negotiates with Russia, a crisis in transatlantic relations. Does the EU have a plan? And where does the UK fit in all of this? Welcome to Bridge the Channel. Hello and welcome to another episode of Bridge the Channel, brought to you by the Martens Center. Life moves very fast in a Donald Trump world, and since we last saw each other, we have had the beginning of direct US-Russia negotiations over Ukraine, the Europeans scrambling to find an army virtually overnight, and what amounts to pretty much a full-blown crisis of transatlantic relations. The first immediate response of the Europeans to the announcement that the Americans would be beginning negotiations with Russia over Ukraine was Emmanuel Macron convening a summit in Paris, where many important European leaders attended, crucially not just EU leaders, but also the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer. And the summit was interesting because we already saw two different perspectives crystallizing. On the one hand, we have had countries that were a bit more hesitant to the demand to deploy peacekeeping troops to Ukraine, most notably Germany and Poland. And on the other camp, we had most notably France and the UK together in a reversal of Brexit dynamics. They remain the two European powers most ready and most committed in developing some kind of a peacekeeping force that could perhaps take over peacekeeping duties in Ukraine. It also shows, of course, that on this topic, the EU remains to this day quite divided. Looking more broadly, what this shows is that, of course, two sides recognize that they still need each other, particularly in a world dominated by Donald Trump. The EU knows that the UK remains an important security player, and it will be an indispensable player for the future of Ukraine and for the future of the European security order. But the UK as well knows that if it wants to serve its goals in Ukraine and support Ukraine, which is the main foreign policy goal, this goal has to go through Europe. The EU and the UK share many overlapping interests in Ukraine, of course, but what about the relationship between the two in what might very well be a new European security architecture in a world where the Americans expect Europeans to undertake much more of the costs of their own security? And here I think it is important to take a step back and recognize that the two sides do not necessarily share the same goals and priorities. Many people in Europe hope, or perhaps even fear, if the United States withdraws from Europe more, that the EU should develop its own autonomous, independent security capability. For the British, it remains an important strategic goal, never having to choose between Europe and the US. And a lot of the things that Keir Starmer is currently doing could pretty much show that the UK really hopes to keep the Americans on side in European security. Moving forward, of course, we will be seeing cooperation between the two sides on various issues where they may have overlapping interests. But for the EU, it is still important to understand that if it ever came where the UK would have to choose between Europe and the United States, the choice would be very, very difficult. But an autonomous European security and defense is probably something that the UK would find it very difficult to live with. That was another episode of Bridge the Channel. The way things are moving, by the next time we meet, who knows? We might even have an agreement between the United States and Russia on Ukraine. Loads of moving pieces. The UK and the EU are struggling to find their role in what appears to be an emergent new security architecture in Europe. Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer will be meeting Donald Trump in Washington. There's also a UK-EU summit scheduled for a few months from now. The relationship between the two always remains dynamic, and it's today more important than ever. And we're going to be here to cover it for you. Until next time, take care.